What up, everybody? Blake Scholar Magic here, and today I'm going to bring you Anowon, the Ruin Thief. This is a 2 generic, 1 blue, 1 black, legendary creature vampire rogue. Other rogues you control get 1/1. Whenever one or more rogues you control deal combat damage to a player, that player mills a card for each 1 damage dealt to them. If the player mills at least 1 creature card this way, you draw a card. This functions really nicely as a buff to all our other little tiny vampire rogues that are out there, rogues in general. So that's really nice. In addition, each time we deal a damage, any type of damage, combat damage to a player, for each damage that is dealt to that player, they'll mill a card. If they milled at least 1 creature card this way, we draw a card. Now, if for instance, if an opponent mills 2 creature cards, we'll still just draw a card, a single card. We won't draw a card for each of those creatures. So this really incentivizes us to spread our damage out, to hit multiple opponents. For each instance that they'll mill a card, then a creature card we will draw. So it's definitely a card that you definitely want to, really beef up with some nice combat type of attackers. You want to definitely have some evasiveness as well. And what you'll notice about this deck is that we're just going to draw a ton of cards. So it's really straightforward. We want to fill up our opponent's graveyards. We want to be stealing their things. That's definitely a criteria of this. In addition, we just want to focus on drawing as many cards as possible. If we can draw lots of cards, that's going to really kind of set off our game plan in general. So, and who doesn't love that? Who doesn't love to draw a lot of cards and take your opponent's things? And that's kind of like built into the name itself, Anowon the Ruin Thief. And it probably took me a couple revisits back to this deck to realize that this is definitely geared for stealing your opponent's stuff. And there's probably a couple more ways you can go into this. This is a nice little high-powered version. It's got, for instance, Force of Will. So it's definitely really builds upon getting us a ton of cards and having payoffs for that, and not being worried about pitching cards in our hand, and having nice cheeky counter spells in our deck. That's kind of the main priority of Anowon. Very cool Dimir commander. Really love it. So let's get into some of the cards. First of all, let's just think of a card like Bloodseaf Ascension. And this kind of fell into my lap a couple times through Anowon, and it's now it's just stuck in there. It's just a really nasty one. This thing will accrue counters on it each time that opponent loses 2 or more life on a turn cycle. That happens at each end step. And then, for instance, if this has 3 or more quest counters on it, whenever a card, even a single card, is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodseaf Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, you may have that player lose 2 life. If you do, you gain 2 life. So this card will actually end games sooner than later. You can imagine Anowon, plugging into opponents because it is a buff. It does buff up your other rogues, so they get a little stronger. And rogues themselves always get a little stronger. There's lots of lords that kind of get in there and kind of will give us a little bit more power, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But the rogues are not weak in any sense, and each time they connect with Anowon on the battlefield, and if you have a Bloodseaf Ascension, each of your opponents are going to be milling 6 or 7 cards, on any of those turn cycles. So if this is activated, they're just losing 12 life, and you're gaining 12 from each of those opponents. So it's really nasty stuff, really good, powerful magic. And there's also other cards that just work and slot so well here. So in addition, a card like Invasion of Amoket, this is one of those really nice ones. This was from March of the Machine, I believe. And it's going to have all our opponents mill 3 cards, which is very interesting in general. And then they're also, it's each player will mill 3 cards, so we get to build our own graveyard as well. Then each opponent discards a card, and then we draw a card. And then, of course, if you deal 4 damage to this thing, you can flip it. And this is kind of the stealing factor, where we can start stealing things and being selective. So there's that. And now we have our Lazotep Convert available. And it's a copy of any card. It will get that Enter the Battlefield trigger. If there's Enter the Battlefield triggers, it'll be a 4/4 as well, which is nice. So it gets a nice little base power there. And it's a zombie in addition to the other types. So, we get a really nice selection out of our opponent's graveyard there, and maybe our own. So I think that card is very cool to try out. Additionally, these are just cards that are just absolutely whacked in our deck. For instance, a Memory Plunder. You may play target instant or sorcery card in an opponent's graveyard without paying its mana cost. Sweet. And it's just so appropriately, costed, just four total. There's going to be so many selections because, even if graveyards get empty, we could just refill them back up with our rogues. As long as Anowon's on the battlefield, it's just like, as long as there's not a ley line on the void or something on the battlefield, we can definitely have a good time with Memory Plunder. Additionally, Rev the Tithe Extractor. This is one of the newer hot cards, right, in general. The waifu, as they say. Yeah, what a ridiculous art this is. But the little hand is kind of interesting. And you know what? I noticed this. I don't know if you noticed this, but it almost appears like she has 3 hands. This is her little sash, but it looks like she has 3 hands. She's kind of a weird thing, and she's got this fuzzy little thingamajigger there. But this is similar. Actually, it's a very similar design, I think, to Anowon. Basically, whenever we get in for combat damage, we're going to get access to our opponent's library. We'll also get a treasure, so it's really busto. It's just a perfect complement to Anowon. Really strong card. Also, a good Death Touch one of our creatures. But usually our creatures are usually just evasive in general. We don't have to be worried about being blocked. But, if they need a block, they can have that would only be on attack. But anyways, here's Sheeldred. And this one is just another nice way for us to get into the graveyard as well of our opponents. But also onto the battlefield, they'll have to sacrifice a non-token creature or a planeswalker. So we get a little removal. And then we can go ahead and get value from the Saga side. And then we'll get to destroy a creature on Chapter 1 from each opponent. On Chapter 2, all the opponents will discard 3 cards. And then on Chapter 3, we'll return all creature cards from the graveyard to the battlefield. That's all. So I believe actually this is a very appropriate Sheeldred deck because I think we can protect the Saga. I think we have enough counterspell interaction and just abundance of cards in kind of flash play where we can kind of play on our opponent's turns that really this card is really nasty. And I think actually this deck actually probably has a chance to flip over that Sheeldred and get into that Rise of the Dark Realms kind of function. Here's Sir Conrad, and this card is just absolutely insane in this deck. And I do believe in the Sir Conrad. It is a very high casting cost card, but it kind of happens to have value for us because when we're attacking, we're going to start seeing the benefits of this card immediately. It can happen on a turn cycle where it will seem like an enter the battlefield trigger because we're going to be attacking after this comes on the battlefield. And then as things go into the graveyard for our opponent, as long as they're creature cards, Sir Conrad will start draining the opponents by dealing 1 damage to each opponent for each instance of a creature card dying, a creature card being put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaving leaves your graveyard. Sir Conrad the Green gives 1 damage to each opponent, and it also has that milling effect where you can blast into it and have your each player keep milling cards into their graveyard. I thought this would be a really interesting card to go with Breach the Multiverse Sir Conrad because each player will mill 10 cards, and you'd expect because we're playing high creature counts, probably I'd say you're usually drawing off of Anowon if you're kind of curious from your opponents because usually they have a high abundance of creatures in their deck. You don't encounter Gandalfs too often, and even if you do, they still play creatures, and so sometimes you still get hits off of them. But usually they do. But Breach the Multiverse, that's 10 cards milled into the graveyard, right, for each opponent and ourselves, and that's just the first function of it. That would be great for Sir Conrad. It's going to see probably 10 creatures go into the grave at least, and then they all lose 10 life. That's pretty nice. I think that's a good rate to start, a good synergy there. And then additionally, for each of those players, we're going to get to put a creature or planeswalker card onto the battlefield. It'll become a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. So we just love it. It's for each player. So it's awesome. It's just amazing value. You're not going to be sad against this in a 3-player format ever. Maybe in maybe if you're only playing against 2 other opponents, you can maybe not have the best result. But if you have your full pod, 4 players, you're going to love the Breach. You're going to get some good stuff there, right? So we like that. I thought Ghost Factum was a very Chad card to play in this deck because it's going to just like eat the the nicest things from our opponent's graveyards. Like we're gonna be milling so many cards. We're gonna be like, okay, that looks like a nice one to put in the Ghost Vacuum. I think that's great. So yeah, we can just suck up some nice things up with the Ghostbuster Vacuum here, and exile a card from a graveyard. That's its function for a tap. It's only one to cast this, and then 6 in a tap. Sacrifice Ghost Vacuum. Put each creature card exile with Ghost Vacuum onto the battlefield. Under your control, they'll fly in a counter on it. Each of them is a 1/1 spirit in addition to its other types activated only as a sorcery. So we'll be looking for those nasty, like entering the battlefield creatures. Really want the value because they'll just be 1/1 spirits. But it is very cool, and that's a 6 and a tap. It's not that bad. Fill this up with a couple nice things. Have it on one of our turns, if we don't have too much going on, or that's just the best play for us, we just go ahead and crack this thing, and we'll just do this at sorcery speed. And we'll get those nice enter the battlefield triggers for all those creatures that we love. I actually like the 2 reanimation spells in here because it doesn't really make us like have to run designated self-mill. It's just like animation for cards in everybody's graveyard. So I think Reanimate's a great choice, of course, because we can get into our graveyard or our opponent's graveyards pretty easily, and just easily resurrect that creature, which is nice. Animate Dead has a similar instance of this. I suppose you could play Dance with Dead, but I wanted to also really focus on cards and drawing like lots of cards because we do have some win cons in that manner as well. But if I am thinking that maybe we should like have like a Dance with the Dead because that will hit all graveyards as well, that will be similar to the Reanimate and Animate Dead where we can just hit anybody's graveyard and resurrect a creature. So any of them seem fine. It really does. And we'll see how it goes. But I do have the really nice Prowl cards in here. And this one will actually let us do some degree of stealing. So we can play this for 4 instead of the 7 if we do damage with a rogue on a turn cycle. And then we can search our opponent's library for an instant or sorcery card. You may play that card without paying its mana cost. Whew. Nasty, just nasty. Like, what is that? And it's just so reduced in cost. You can see the power is just really strong. You have like kind of OTK type of things where you can like lock people out, because your planes have such selection. It's really strong. Especially this also, this is a really nasty extra turn spell. And I think I had more turn spells in this at one time when I first built this deck, and it wasn't really too fun for my opponents. I just, be able to kind of lock them out really fast, and it was just kind of devastating. So I think this one is kind of on flavor, where it is a little higher costed. We definitely want to have the Prowl for the 6. And in that manner, if we had dealt combat damage on that turn, we'll create X 1/1 Black Fairy rogue creature tokens with flying, where X is the damage dealt to your opponents this turn. So we could create lots of rogues fast. If this spell's Prowl cost was paid, take an extra turn after this one. So you get a lot of tokens that are rogues that are flying. It's really nasty, and you get an extra turn. Scheming Symmetry has to be one of the more nasty cards. It's basically like a Demonic Tutor for this deck. It just doesn't say the name Demonic Tutor. But as long as we have creatures on the battlefield in Anowon, in the Scheming Symmetry, we'll be able to tutor up a card for ourselves. And then when we deal, we'll just have the opponent, they'll just choose a card at random. Usually, if they're not familiar with this card, they'll pick a nice one. We get to put a card on top of our library as well, and they will do so as well. But when we hit them on that turn, because we are incentivized to spread our damage out to all opponents, when we hit them, they're just going to mill that card, so they don't get access to it. But once they mill, or our opponent mills the card, one of the opponents we deal damage to that turn, which will usually happen, we'll just draw the card we tutored up to our top of our library. So it's really fantastic. Also, we can just do ahead and play a Mystical Tutor, just to kind of be efficient. We can find one of those Prowl cards that we had mentioned earlier. We have lots of nice selection here, and it's just going to be very easy for us to kind of lock the game out from there anyways. Here's March of the Swirling Mist. This is a really nice pitch card because, like I mentioned, we will draw so many cards in this deck. Anowon, the card itself just draws many cards. So having these kind of spells, these cheap interactive spells where we could just pitch cards, and basically what we mean by that is we exile them from our hand, and will make this card less to cast. We can interact with our opponent's things, we can interact with our things, we can phase things out. It's just a really nice card in general for us. Force of Will similarly kind of meets that requisite of being able to pitch cards for a free counter spell. So it's just really nice. I believe that would also have to be a blue card. Yes, and you also pay a life, but obviously the best counter spell and in the game. Close second, we'll have to say, is Mana Drain. Maybe Mana Drain is the best counter spell, but it is really quite good as well, isn't it? So they're both very, very top-notch spells. This one is just going to net you mana on your next turn in the form of colorless mana. So it's just really stupid good, and it's just 2 blue, just the price of like a regular counter spell. Additionally, Cyclonic Rift is just a nice haymaker spell that we can just kind of bounce everything back to our opponents. Maybe they're accruing lots of value or going off with like lots of treasures or tokens, and then all of a sudden we overload this thing. We could do this at instant speed as well, and then all their permanents, all our opponents' permanents return to their hand. It's just really devastating, really nasty to play against. Deadly Rollick is that nice free spell as long as we have our commander out, and we can go ahead and exile a creature. It's really nice. Or if we don't have Anowon out, it costs 4, which is a little bit more. Arcane Denial, this kind of gets into the idea that we want to get value from our counter spells and draw. So anything that kind of has, draw associated, we like because we're playing a Teferi package. So we're going to have, like, for instance, Teferi's Ageless Insight and Teferi the Tireless Pilgrim. So that should get you really excited about this deck because we're really geared for building into the cards and getting some card advantage as all from our things can, pay off for other cards that we play and maybe net us more cards in the process. So an Arcane Denial is a nice counter spell where we will be giving cards to our opponent, but we also be giving back a card to ourselves. 3 Steps Ahead is also just a nice kind of one we like because it does also act like kind of a brainstorm if we need it to. We'll draw 2 cards and then discard a card. So, we'll actually net a card on this. So there is card advantage built in. This can also be a counter spell. We can also create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature control, and that could be fantastic as well. So 3 Steps Ahead is just another nice one for us. Here's Drown in the Loch. So this one is just a wonderful counter spell as well. Hold on, I'm watching Mild Hound and I got into an ad. So 1 second. I'm back. My God, that ad was so loud. I'm so sorry. Okay, so now we have Drown in the Loch. And this one is going to just be able to, based on this is perfect for us, right? Because we're milling lots of cards into our opponent's graveyards. And this thing will be able to counter higher costed things as long as we have a lot of cards into our opponent's graveyard. So for instance, counter target spell with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. So if an opponent has 10 cards in their graveyard, we can counter a 10 costed spell or less, and that's really good. And that could happen. And now we could also destroy a creature with that converted cost, less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard as well. So it can also act as a removal spell. So we just love that. That's great. And now an Offer You Can't Refuse. This is just a really nasty, like cheap 1 blue spell that says no to a non-creature spell. They'll make 2 treasures, but it's so cheap. It hits so many things. It's just a really fantastic really nasty little 1-costed blue spell. And then some more interaction. We have like a mass board wipe. We do this because we play Faceless Haven, and Faceless Haven can act as a rogue. So we just like that kind of tribal aspect, and it's fine to run Blood on the Snow, I think, as like another counterpoint to that, where we can just have like if an opponent is kind of getting out of hand, we can kind of bomb the board and rebuild. So let's get into if we are drawing so many cards type of thing. And you'll see Tamiyo is just it's not a rogue, but I want to try it really bad in this deck because we're playing cards like Brainstorm and you all know that if you have like a, if you can, turn the Tameo over early enough and, get it to its requisite and draw all those cards, you're going to be living a really good life. So, and Tameo is just so multifaceted. And well, it's just going to accrue some of those clue tokens at the very least when it attacks. It's going to be drawing cards for us. It's kind of exactly what we want. Now to the rogues. This rogue is exceptional because each time we play a rogue, we are going to have an opponent, each opponent mill 2 cards. So it just goes into that kind of stealing kind of function again, and it really plays into our game plan. This thing will also get Death Touch in 2/1 as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. So that's very cool. Tiny Bones is also fits right into our deck where it's just that beautiful 1/1 Death Toucher, and it also can steal from our opponents because we're going to be putting lots of stuff in their grave. We get a nice selection, and it's just a really nice one. I really like Tiny Bones here a lot. Now we get into our like evasive rogues that just say, hey, you can't block me. Sometimes there's downsides. This one just can't block, and that's fine. It's just a shapeshifter. It's a changeling. It's considered a rogue. It's part of our tribal synergy. It's going to get the buff with Anowon. It can't block, so what? We're going to be on the offensive. This one is just a 1/2 for 1 that can't be blocked, and it's a rogue. So it's just like, whoa, these 1-drops are completely correct. This is really what makes the deck sing, is that they have these beautiful 1-drop creatures that just really are just really hitting hard, and are so they can't be blocked. I mean, it's just, there's not much else to say about them. I mean, they're gonna get in, and they're gonna like set off Anowon, and like at the very least with Anowon, they're gonna be milling 2 cards, right? Because they get that +1/+1. So really, Anowon really kind of, the fact that it's a lord and has such a powerful triggered ability really makes it something else. Fear, this one basically can only be blocked by, I believe, artifact and black creatures when they have fear. So still very evasive. That's like the scariest thing you want to see, right? As a 1-drop in an Anowon deck is like a prickly Boggart. You're like, oh, you're in for it. I mean, Anowon's going to be doing things if you see these nasty 1-drops coming down, right? Here's Merfolk Windrobber, just a nice evasive 1/1 flyer. Can also draw a card if you sacrifice it later on if an opponent has 8 or more cards in the graveyard. In addition, when it deals combat damage to player, that player mills a card. So it definitely helps start milling them as well. Here's Stink Drinker Bandit. This is probably one of the more powerful rogues in our deck because we can play it for cheap if we deal damage for a rogue that turn by playing 1 generic and 1 black. And then whenever a rogue you control attacks and isn't blocked, and that's most of our rogues because they're unblockable, it gets 2/1 until end of turn. So it gets even stronger. So you have this in Anowon on the battlefield and one of those 1/1s that all of a sudden they're doing 4 damage. And that's 4 cards going into the grave, baby. Here's Soaring Thought Thief, and also just a wonderful card as it's just a nice flash flyer. And then it will also, if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, our rogues will get that 1/0 buff. Really nice. And whenever one or more rogues you control attack, each opponent mills 2 cards. So it kind of enables that juicy graveyard where we're going to be looking at their stuff and getting it. Metallic Mimic, this one will also be a nice shapeshifter for us. It will act as a rogue, and it will see itself as a rogue. And then in addition, our rogues that enter will enter with an additional 1/1 counter on it, so it gets a little buffer. Bitter Blossom. This is that very dependable token generator that creates fairies. 1/1 flyer fairy rogues. We'll lose a life on that upkeep, but we'll just have continuous tokens being made, and that's really nice for us. And there'll be flyers. Here's a Fairy Mastermind, also a fairy rogue, just a very busto card. It's going to draw us a ton of cards in general from our opponents, which is nice in Commander. And then it's just a nice 2/1 flyer. And it also has this kind of just sneaky text too, where each player draws a card. Whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you draw a card. So yeah, very interesting in general. Probably want to activate that on your opponent's turns, of course, if you need to. Sig River Cutthroat. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn, you may draw a card. Fantastic. We're going to be doing damage to our opponents. This can also trigger on opponent's attacks, like when our opponent attacks into things. It's at the beginning of each end step. If an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn, you may draw. It's fantastic. Mercurial Spell Dancer. This one is also unblockable. I just really like it for like our removal suite in general, like our, Drown in the Locks, Fell to Profane, Deadly Rollick. Could even like be our Brainstorm. Could even be our bigger stuff. But if this thing accrues oil counters on it as it comes in unblockable and it accrues 2, upon that second time that it's done it, you may then remove those 2 oil counters from it. And if we do, when we cast our next instant or sorcery spell this turn, we'll copy it. And that could be really nasty, especially with our Prowl spells. I like it. I like the Spell Dancer. I like the unblockability overall. Here's a Thieving Skydiver. This one will just steal really valuable artifacts in the early turn cycle. You'll be able to get into your opponent's soul rings, which is nice. You might be able to take some of their valuable artifacts as well, maybe later in the game. But yeah, it has that nice little ability to kick. And when you do kick it, for instance, add to its casting cost of that 2, you gain control of a target artifact with converted mana cost X or less. That artifact is an equipment attached to Thieving Skydiver. How cool is that? Frogtasser Bonarut. Haste. Goblin spells and rogue spells cost 1 less to play. Fantastic. We love it. And it has haste. Not much to hate about that card. I love it. It's a rogue and it acts like kind of like a jet medallion. So that's cool. Ona's Blackguard. This one is just a really nasty thing, right? Where your opponents are actually going to start discarding. When each time, like if this is on the battlefield, our rogues will enter a little bit stronger because it's going to add like a metallic mimic kind of function. And then whenever a creature you control the 1/1 counter on it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card. Ugh, gross. Douth the Voidwalker is a Voidwalker, Skywalker, Voidwalker. Maybe they did that for Darth Vader. Yeah, maybe it is Darth Vader. It kind of looks a little bit like him. But it's a Voidwalker. It's in between worlds and planes, right? It's in the void. And it's just a 3/2 shadow. I'm pretty sure that basically, I'll have to look into that exactly. But it's pretty hard to interact. I think it only can be blocked by other creatures with shadow. So there's not many that can do that. But yeah, this one is not a Nombo with Anowon as well. People, they may be concerned like, well, if it's going to exile cards, do those things like, are they seen when Anowon mills them? Yeah, they're seen. They hit the graveyard still. But once they do, they would be exiled. So, if a creature hits, and that'll meet the requisite, and the Douthie won't interrupt that. But yeah, the things that once they hit, they are exiled, right? So that's okay though, because we can tap this and we can play one of our opponent's spells, and we're going to be milling lots of cards. So we can see like a lot of things, and if we like any of them, then we can cast them with a Douthie Voidwalker. So it's fantastic. Here's a Grim Hireling, and this one is just, once again, we're going to be hitting everybody. We're going to be attacking everybody. I always have good success with Anowon. It's just very low to the ground, and it has these very powerful cards that like kind of accompany it, and they just work together. So yeah, I haven't had too much of a trouble in a casual format with this deck. Of course, there's always good decks. There's always good decks to run into, but this one's always got a chance. That Grim Hireling, of course, is just going to love us to hit other opponents, and we'll make 2 treasures each time we hit an opponent with combat damage. So that's really nice. Rankle is just, these are like our OG Kingpin rogues at the top. They're just like saying, hey, what's up? We're just rocking it out here in the 4 spot. And yeah, Rankle is just a nice rogue. It's a nice flyer. We'll have opponents we can discard cards freely. That's fine. We don't mind that too much. We can draw more cards. We love that effect. We just love drawing cards. Each player sacrifices a creature. That's fine too. We might be okay with sacrificing one of our little rogues. No problem. Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. These are our shapeshifter rogues. This one's nice because it's gonna just cancel out the legend ability or the legend rule to our permanents. So that's cool. Like we can have 2 Anowons on the battlefield. We can have 2 Revs on the battlefield. It seems really cool. I like Shakashima. And it's a rogue, so it definitely gets discounted by some of our things like the Frog Tosser Banneret. I was thinking maybe of putting in like a Patchwork Banner here as well. So I think I'm running like a Talisman right now. And perhaps I might consider like, maybe moving a Talisman into like a banner. But we'll see how it goes. To have another extra buff would be kind of nice. I'll have to see, because I did make some changes, but I do know about Patchwork Banner. I think that would be actually really nice as well to get a little extra buffage. But this one is also similar to Sakashima. It won't make the legend rule not apply to all our opponents or all our things, but it will copy, like it can copy a legend, for instance, Anowon, and they won't cancel each other out because it still remains itself Sakashima the imposter. But it does have like it does become a copy of that creature. So it's very interesting, right? Then it can bounce itself back to its hand, which is kind of interesting as well. Here's Gix, and this is kind of when we're getting into our cards. So we play lots of evasive creatures. So this is kind of the bridge, and we're going to demonstrate like how many cards we're going to draw now, not just with Anowon, but just with our other cards in general. Gix loves like little flyers and evasive creatures to kind of get in there and draw a bunch of cards. It will open this up for every opponent too, so it'll incentivize them to not swing on you as well, because it's basically the combat damage to each of our opponents and not ourselves. Pay a life, that's in each instance of combat damage, you draw a card. Pay a life, and then we will draw. And they will draw. Enduring Curiosity. This is also the one really nice one where we will be dealing combat damage as well, and then we'll be drawing. I just wanted to kind of make clear that they don't draw when we hit for the combat damage. It's just whenever an opponent deals combat damage to one of our opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, they draw a card. So it's basically it's not like a collective drawing. It's just each time a creature deals combat damage to one of our opponents. All right. And then additionally, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. That's fantastic. This is ones from the Dustmourn set. It's just very nice, of course. And it's a Cat Glimmer. Yeah, it's a nice one. And of course, like I said, and if this thing even gets removed, it still, comes back to the battlefield as an enchantment. So just kind of like that banner effect, it's just really good, right? It's a creature, it can play that flash speed. Yeah, I would just like this one. Yeah, and we have lots of evasive things, so we're going to be dealing damage and we're going to be drawing more. There's more and more cards. And it kind of bridges into this card in general. This is like the big payoff is a Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. And yeah, that one's just a crazy, crazy planeswalker for this deck. I really like anytime you have like lots of cards being drawn in general, I feel like Teferi is just like a perfect match because it will accrue loyalty counters on basically drawing cards. And I've gotten to that -12 many times. Like, target opponent chooses a permanent they control and return it to their hand. Then they shuffle each non-land permanent they control into its owner's library. It's a nasty bounce effect, right? Where they get to pick one thing they like, but then everything else goes into their library. It's really good. It draws cards basically just by 0 effect. And it can also create a nasty shapeshifter that will get stronger and stronger as well. So just kind of decide what you want to do with them. Brainstorm is going to be good for that Tamiya. It's going to be great for our Teferi. It's going to be great for our Teferi Ageless Insight. You just draw those cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. It really, really procs our stuff really well. Here's Ristic Study. So this is kind of the nastier side of the deck, where, like I said, you're just going to be drawing tons of cards. Teferi's Ageless Insight. If you would draw a card except the first one you draw in each of your draw steps, draw 2 cards instead. So we draw for our turn. Then as we draw additional cards, we'll draw an additional card for each of those cards that we draw. By Nathasa, this will see the combat damage that we do for each of our things. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. Fantastic. And that has that really cheeky effect for one generic, one blue. Tap creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able. Very interesting. Can kind of open them up. Kindred Discovery. As Kindred Discovery enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. So we're going to pick Rogue. Each time a Rogue comes onto the battlefield, we'll draw. Each time they attack, we'll draw a card as well. Whew. So good. Here's the One Ring for more cards. We know this thing just draws a bunch of cards. Yeah, we're going to do it. That's how we're going to do it. Black Market Connection is kind of that card that does everything for us. It's going to create rogues. It's going to create ramp. And it's going to draw us cards. So it's perfect. Additionally, I have Dark Ritual. I think this is fine because our Anowon is like basically can be casted on turn 2. And we do want like a turn 2 Anowon if we have like a turn 1 rogue because we'll start getting into the advantages immediately. I think like Dark Ritual and like, like a commander I want to make in comparison to is like Taeko, which is the ninja, the new Ninja Turtle. That card's also 4 mana and would benefit from a card like Dark Ritual. You get it sooner, but are you really like accruing like a lot of value from that? Like, are you going to draw extra cards for whatever reason? Not exactly, no. But with Anowon, you do have a chance for it to be impactful immediately. You could have that turn 1 rogue, and then you can have a turn 2 Anowon, and now you're going to be able to start possibly drawing cards sooner than later. So that does seem like more usefulness. So Dark Ritual definitely makes it. Dousing Dagger also because it's just so easy to get in with our stuff. We have unblockability creatures, and then we can flip this over and make a rainbow land. It's fantastic. Talisman of Dominance. This is a nice mana rock that will create Dimir colors. Arcane Signet for creating any color in our commander's color identity. Thought Vessel for the no maximum hand size. That's also going to be important with Reliquary Tower. I think I had Reliquary Towers put to the side here, and that's also in the deck as well. So we can just kind of get into our lands here really quick. And here's just the Mimic. Glasspool Mimic is also a rogue. It can just basically copy one of our creatures on the battlefield or act as an island that would be tapped. Seagate Restoration for drawing a bunch of cards, of course. Fail to Profane for some removal. These are just our nice multi-faced land cards. So these can all act as lands as well. Sink to Stupor is a bounce spell. Academe Awakening is a resurrection spell. Malika Rebirth is also like kind of a regeneration spell. This one will get into our graveyard, of course, which is nice for our little costed rogues. This one will preserve a rogue on the battlefield. Otawara to bounce. Takanuma to build our graveyard and get a card out of it. There's a Reliquary Tower. We have no maximum hand size. Really good for us. Add 1 to our mana pool. Faceless Haven to act as a road, a snow land. We have the Mana Confluence. City of Brass. Fable Passage. Prismatic Vista. Polluted Delta. Watery Grave. Probably should have their Surveil land in here as well. To be honest, those are so very good. So maybe that will go over like a Shipwreck Marsh. There's our Ice Tunnel. Clearwater Pathway. Command Tower. Underground River. Secluded Courtyard to cast our rogues freely. Really nice dual land for them. Snow-covered swamps. And I believe we have 7 of those. And 7 islands. So there's the deck. I hope you all enjoyed the Anowon feature today. I sure did. If you did, hit me with a subscribe. I appreciate y'all. We're on our way to 300 subscribers, so that's very cool. Very cool stuff indeed. And yeah, there's so many interesting cards here, but they all work. I've always had like a good success with the Gix. It is true. Like you don't want to ignore the fact that, your opponents will draw cards if they hit your other opponents, right? And not yourself. So, you want to pay attention. You want to make sure that they're getting the cards because, it'd be sad. Like if you said, oh, this will just draw me cards if you didn't read the card completely. So it is an interesting card in general, but it definitely works out for you. I'd say so. Sakashima the Imposter, Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. Yeah, these are just really cool rogues in general. Yeah, I always liked this deck. It always kind of stood its, it's just very particular. It's just very straightforward, right? Like it's a card where you're definitely like could play Mana Drain and be very, very excited about it because there's so many cards to be had in this deck. It's just all the cards just kind of it's very blue, isn't it? It is kind of a very strong bluey deck. And it just has some nice heavy hitters in the black. Seems to be really nasty. And here's our lands again, of course. Some beautiful lands here. Yep, and that's the 100. That was a very easy deck tech for me today. Let's go over some of the cards here for the giveaway, of course. And we have the Viper Lady. We have some Viper Lady friends to go along with some nice little borderless Kamigawa one that get you started with Ophelia. I thought that'd be very cool. So there's that. There's just some other cards in here that I like. I'll probably add like another mystery card or two when I do send it out, but that'll be for our 300 subscribers. And yeah, I think we'll be giving away a great henge for the 400 and some other nice ones. So yeah, we'll eventually get to 1,000. We're steadily climbing every month. The summer will be great because school's out and, I can do more live things. So let me know what you all want to do next. I think my options are Myrel or Taeko, the Ninja Turtle. So or Greasefang. So whatever one you're excited about, let me know. And then I'll make sure I do that one next. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.